Hey, what's going on, guys? Roam Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Arcane Mage for Mythic Plus in Season 1 of The War Within. Let's go ahead and start out with some of the strengths, and we'll get into the weaknesses of Arcane Mage. So one of the main strengths is they do have a lot of tools for survivability. So not necessarily self-sustained, but they're able to survive a lot of high burst damage. And we'll kind of get into those specific spells once we go into the utility section. We do have pretty good group crowd control as well, so something very similar, just kind of, very similar like a Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid has a ton of AOE stops, knocks, that sort of stuff. You're going to see something very similar with Arcane Mage. We also have very good funnel damage and single target damage as well. So in packs where you need to focus down one specific mob, you really want an Arcane Mage in the group. While we don't have, the craziest AoE damage, we are able to funnel a whole bunch of damage into one specific target. Now, some of the weaknesses is you are sort of proc based, so depending on if you get your procs to kind of line up or not, depending on how long the trash lives, you may or may not be doing more damage on one pull than another pull, just kind of depending on how that pull goes, how long the mobs live, who's using their cooldowns. So to really see that consistent damage from pack to pack, you have to kind of get a little bit higher into Mythic Plus keys. Then kind of like we said earlier, another weakness is they have very limited sustain. So sure, they can counter burst damage very well, better than most other specs. You're not going to be able to recover health without a healer. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Mythic Plus utility for the Arcane Mage. So just like most other specs, we're not going to cover absolutely everything, but we are going to cover some of the core items here. So we have Mass Barrier, which is extremely strong cooldown. This is going to give a barrier to your entire party. And this is one of the main reasons that we can counter burst damage so effectively. Our main interrupt is going to be our counter spell, which is on about a 24-second cooldown. This interrupt is tied to the longest school lockout in the game. We do also have our Dragon's Breath, which is an AoE disorient. Now this can be traded out for the Supernova. However, Supernova is classified as a knockup and not necessarily a disorient, and typically a disorient is more sought after. And then we also have our Blast Wave, which is just a short-range AoE knockback. We also have our Arcane Intellect, which is going to be a group-wide intellect buff. We also bring a Lust, we bring Time Warp, so that's very nice. You can kind of tick that box when you're playing Arcane Mage, so you don't have to rely on somebody else to bring that to the group. However, there is some personal responsibility if you're the only one with Lust in the group. We also have our Ice Block. However, in most cases, we are taking Ice Cold instead of Ice Block. It just seems to be more useful in more scenarios because you're able to do damage while getting the damage reduction. So this is another way that we can really counter that burst damage through cooldowns like Ice Cold. And then the final one I'm going to talk about here is Mass Invisibility, which can be pretty nice to skip trash packs or, kind of change up the route in a specific dungeon. Okay, let's just talk about some general gameplay tips for Arcane Mage. So Arcane Mage has a lot of different things that they have to manage. They have resources like mana, they have cooldowns, and we have a ton of procs. And we also have multiple different phases. So you have a big burn, a mini burn, and a filler phase. So big burn is when you're going to have very specific buffs like Arcane Surge or Siphon Storm. And you're going to get Siphon Storm from channeling your evocation. And then also when you have Touch of the Magi on your target. The mini burn is when you only have Touch of the Magi. And then the filler phase is going to be when you don't have any of those available. So in terms of managing your mana, there are going to be several times where you do run out of mana in your rotation. However, most of your cooldowns will give us mana back. So whenever you need to go into a big mini or big burn phase, you will have a cooldown to get you that mana back. So running out of mana is fine. And when you do run out of mana, typically what you're going to be doing is just building up arcane charges and then using your arcane barrage to dump those charges. Another big mistake that people make is they sit on their cooldowns for too long. So our cooldowns are pretty short and you want to be using them as much as we possibly can. Also, we do have shifting power to get additional CDR. So in most cases, it's better to just go ahead and send the cooldown rather than waiting on the next big pack. It really just depends. If a pack is dying and it's at 20% health and your cooldown comes up, sure, don't use a cooldown. But the general rule of thumb that I like to sit by is if you're able to get the full value of your cooldown, then go ahead and use it. The next thing you're going to be aware of is going to be your surroundings. So if you are running something like Spellslinger, you are going to be firing out a whole bunch of different arcane orbs. So you're going to be very careful of, if you're standing like right on the tank and there's a mob or a pack very close to you, you don't want to be facing that pack and shoot an orb into them. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about our opener first. So before your opener, there are a couple things that you do want to prep. You do want to prep your mirror image, and then you also want to channel your evocation for the Siphon Storm buff. So Siphon Storm is going to give you a huge intellect buff, so you want to have that intellect right before pull. Now, one thing that's very crucial here is evocation is going to grant us something called clear casting. So clear casting is going to make our next arcane missiles or arcane explosion free. So that's pretty nice, but the main thing that clear casting is going to be giving us is something called nether precision. So when we consume that clear casting effect, we're going to increase the damage of our next 2 arcane blast or barrages by 20%. So this is why we want to follow this up with an arcane missiles, is to consume that clear casting proc. So then we want to go into our lust and then our tempered potion. So now we have all these charges that are kind of built up and stored that we can then funnel into our next arcane blast. Now from here, we can dump this into a huge arcane surge. And the way arcane surge works is based on how much mana we have, it's going to dump all that mana into a whole bunch of damage. And this does both single target and AOE damage. And this will also give us another charge of clear casting. So through the improved clear casting talent, we can actually get 2 charges of clear casting, which can then further be funneled into our arcane blast. Now up next, we'll be casting our Touch of the Magi. Now, one thing you need to be careful of is Touch of the Magi can actually go out right before your arcane surge. So you want to make sure that arcane surge hits the target and then you Touch of the Magi. So Touch of the Magi is going to absorb all the damage that we do in this short window, and it's going to explode for 20% of that damage. It's also going to generate some arcane charges. Now that is your general opener. So from here, you will go into either the single target or the AOE rotation. So let's go ahead and take a look at the single target priority. So after your opener, you're typically skipping directly to step 5 and you are pumping in arcane blasts. And you will be spamming those arcane blasts until you pretty much run out of mana. Now, while you are spamming those arcane blasts, you're going to have things expire. For example, if we look at step 1, your arcane surge will expire at some point. So the second that expires, you want to go into your shifting power to get some more CDR. You will also at some point run through your nether precision charges. So when you do get another clear casting effect, then you want to always be consuming that with an arcane missiles. It's very important because again, your clear casting grants nether precision, which buffs your arcane blast. And then for step 3 here, you probably want something to be able to track your ether vision and your intuition. So whenever we do consume those nether precision charges from above, we're going to get these stacks of ether vision, and that's going to be coming from one of our talents. And this is just a stacking effect that's going to funnel into our next arcane barrage. And then we also have our tier bonus intuition. So our arcane blast and arcane barrage have that 5% chance to make our next arcane barrage deal 20% increased damage and generate 4 arcane charges. So whenever that does proc, we always want to be using an arcane barrage. And then if you ever find yourself less than 4 arcane charges, then you can always use an arcane orb to quickly get up to those 4 charges. Then outside of that, you're just kind of spamming arcane blast, and then when you get low on mana, you're dumping through arcane barrage. Now for AOE priority, things are going to kind of shift a little bit. We are going to be introduced to something called Magi Spark here, and Magi Spark has been kind of happening the whole time, but it's a little bit more prevalent on AOE scenarios. So it's going to funnel all the arcane blast damage into one target and then do like an explosion effect for 100% of its damage. So very important to use that. Then as we use our cooldowns, we want to be using shifting power to get that increased CDR. Your next priority is going to be casting your arcane orb whenever we're at 0 charges. Our next priority is going to be clear casting. So again, just kind of going back to nether precision. We want to be able to funnel that nether precision damage into our arcane barrage. And then if you get an either to proc, just go ahead and send arcane missiles whenever you get that proc. Then from here, we're just going to simply be generating and spending our arcane charges. We'll be dumping with arcane barrage, generating with arcane explosion. And you only want to arcane barrage if you have exactly 4 charges. And you only want to arcane explosion if you have exactly 0 charges. And you typically want to do this because your arcane blast damage gets stronger and stronger the more charges, the more arcane charges you have. And we don't have a ton of talents that really buff up our arcane explosion. Almost everything is really funneled into arcane blast. So you actually end up getting more damage out of using arcane blast in AoE scenarios rather than arcane explosion if you are above 0 charges. Then finally, step 8, go ahead and arcane barrage if you do go Then Then looking at stat priority here, it's going to be intellect over haste, over versatility, over critical strike, over mastery. And then here is a quick look at the talents we'll be running. There will be an import string in the description of the video. All right, guys, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. If you enjoy our work, we do also have a Patreon link in the description of the video if you want to help support us. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.